India has taken a significant step in this direction by establishing the Public Health Foundation of India and also the National Rural Health Mission. India's second great demographic opportunity involves the acceleration of fertility decline. And in general, there are three main instruments for promoting fertility decline, and India has scope for improvement with respect to all of them. The first instrument is the expansion of family planning services in a way that's respectful of people's reproductive rights. Currently, approximately 1 in 7 Indian women report unmet need for contraception, meaning that contraception is not being used by these currently married women who desire to postpone or forego childbearing. Satisfying that unmet need will help India achieve its stated goal of bringing the total fertility rate down from its current level of 2.7 to the long-run replacement fertility level of 2.1 children per woman. Another proven approach to lowering fertility rates involves efforts to promote infant and child survival. Vaccines against childhood disease are my favorite choice for a very potent way to realize an improvement in child survival. And improvements in child survival, we know from comparative evidence and historical evidence, lead to more than proportionate reductions in fertility. So I'm speaking here, when I talk about vaccines, about expanding coverage of an old generation of inexpensive vaccines, such as those against diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, and measles. I'm also speaking about introducing a new generation of more expensive vaccines against rotavirus and pneumococcal disease, which are two of the leading causes of child death in India. Childhood vaccines also have the virtue of promoting better school attendance, better cognitive function, and better adult health, all of which tend to make vaccinated children more productive and therefore higher earning adults. And these are actually the main reasons why the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced in January a $10 billion commitment to scaling up the delivery of vaccines, mainly for children. India stands to benefit greatly from this and related initiatives because its vaccine coverage rates are currently well below world averages. For example, the vaccine coverage rate for diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, which is a very common indicator that public health people use for national immunization coverage, India's rate is 62%, and that's about 20 percentage points less than for the world as a whole. And then finally, we have girls' education as both an indicator and an instrument of development and fertility decline. So educated mothers, as we all know, tend to have fewer children, as fertility effectively raises the cost of having children by improving the work opportunities that raising children forces most women to forego. Education also empowers women to express their views on how their lives are conducted. Having fewer children allows families to invest more in the health and education of each child, thereby raising the productive capacity of future generations. The effects of education, and girls' education in particular, are extremely powerful. Although India's made progress since the early 1990s, there's considerable scope for continued progress in this area, mainly at the secondary and tertiary levels, as we heard from Minister Sybil yesterday. At the same time, and as we also heard from the Minister, we must make sure we're not misled by statistics, since enrollment in school does not guarantee attendance, and attendance does not guarantee that a student is getting an education of sufficiently high quality to promote their knowledge and skills. Now, I also want to stress here that education has a major role to play, perhaps the major role, in India's ability to capitalize on the demographic dividend. Education, especially, as I say, secondary and tertiary education, will equip India's youth, both boys and girls, with the skills they need to be productive in a fast-moving and unforgiving global economy in which knowledge and skill rule. And as I noted earlier, improving infrastructure, good governance, increasing the efficiency of financial and labor markets, and sound macroeconomic management are also key, although I'll skip over those for now. I'd now like to identify and explore two demographic-related factors that pose potential threats to India's future prosperity. And these threats have to do with population aging and inequality, economic inequality. These aren't the only population-related threats India faces. For example, urbanization and the growth of slum populations poses a set of health and environmental risks that have some potential to impede economic growth. And also, as I'm sure everyone knows, population growth is putting great pressure on India's water resources, which are already in a rather perilous state and could begin to choke off further economic growth. It's a dramatic rise in its 65 and over age population from 5% of the total population today to 14% by the year 2050. That 14% translates into 222 million people, which is roughly 25 million more than the current population of Brazil, which has the fifth largest population in the world. There's been a lot of inquiry into this population aging phenomenon, especially its implications for economic growth. Much of the existing commentary is highly alarmist. As just one example, Peter Peterson, who's former CEO of the now defunct Lehman Brothers, he was also Secretary of Commerce in the U.S. and a chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. He set up a rather serious alarm in a 1999 Foreign Affairs article in which he described global aging, and I quote, as a threat more grave and certain than those posed by chemical weapons, nuclear proliferation, or ethnic strife. Now, Peterson's concern here is that many countries, including India, by the way, will in coming years be flooded with elderly individuals who will endeavor to consume more than they contribute, and that shift will dramatically alter asset values and the income trajectories that people and nations have come to expect. My own views are much less alarmist than those of Peterson, and certainly with respect to India's prospects. First of all, India's 65 and over crowd currently represents only about a fourth of the number of its adolescents and young adults, and it's not going to come to outnumber the younger group for nearly 40 years. Population aging is important, but it's also important that we not lose sight of the fact that the education and training needs of India's adolescents and young adults is truly the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Taking good care of that generation today will make it much easier to attend to growing numbers of older Indians in the future. Now, it's true that adult labor force participation rates will tend to decrease as populations age. But the burden of old age dependency will be substantially offset by the decline in youth dependency associated with declining fertility. In addition, there are a host of behavioral and policy responses to population aging, including higher labor force participation of women, higher savings for retirement, later age of retirement, and possibly increased migration from labor surplus to labor deficit countries. And all of these responses suggest that population aging will not necessarily impede economic growth. So in other words, I am not particularly worried about India having to return its demographic dividend anytime soon, or perhaps ever, as a result of population aging. I'm also not worried that wealthy industrial country markets for goods and services produced by India will collapse under the weight of population aging. Notwithstanding, though, its likely modest effect on economic growth in India, population aging is going to create a significant challenge here, given mainly the challenge arises because of the current reliance of India on private family networks for providing the elderly with care, companionship, and financial support. That private system will not be able to withstand the increased number of older Indians, especially given increased female labor force participation, smaller numbers of more mobile children, widening generation gaps, and a tidal wave of costly-to-treat non-communicable diseases like diabetes, cancer, and stroke. Under such circumstances, people normally look to the state for assistance. And I think that's exactly what's going to happen here. And when it does, if something is not done, people are going to be greeted by a policy vacuum, because less than 10% of the Indian population has health insurance, either public or private, and 90% of the elderly have no pension. Now, I would say, is the time for India to build an evidence base on population aging and to use it to devise a set of related public institutions. I'd also note, as John Chambers reminded us yesterday, that challenges associated with market shifts like global population aging often bring opportunities with them. And I believe that India will have an array of new needs on which I believe that this generation of elderly will have an array of new needs on which India can capitalize, from managing and creating long-term care facilities to specialized financial products to anti-aging products to different types of recreational activities. Now, thus far, I've spoken about India as if it were a homogeneous entity, but that is hardly a good description, because India, as we all know, encompasses numerous sources of potential heterogeneity in the form of language, religion, caste, income, education, perspective. The list goes on and on. Sometimes heterogeneity can be the cause of social and political unrest and instability. Now, a full discussion of inequality in India is beyond the scope of what we have time for here, but I'd like to alert everyone briefly to the magnitude of cross-state demographic heterogeneity as a possible source of potentially destabilizing economic inequality. So this chart here shows cross-state differences in our main indicator of potential for a demographic dividend, namely the ratio of the working age population to the non-working age population. I'm sorry if it's a little hard to read, but let me just tell you that the comparison of Tamil Nadu and Bihar shows as great a disparity as the current difference between Ireland and Rwanda. In other words, Tamil Nadu's economy is getting much more demographic lift than is Bihar. Other demographic indicators show a similarly large range of heterogeneity. For example, in 2001, the total fertility rate varied across the states of India by a factor of more than 3. Fertility in Kerala, for example, is well below the replacement level of 2.1 children per woman, whereas it was more than twice the replacement level in Uttar Pradesh. This disparity corresponds roughly to the current difference in fertility between Japan and Kenya. Cross-state variation in life expectancy is also huge. In 2001, Kerala stood at one extreme at 73 years. At the other extreme was Madhya Pradesh at 59. That disparity is comparable to the current difference between Hungary and Senegal.